Hello, it's the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast with me, Liam, and the wonderful, or not so wonderful, depending on which way you look at it, Chris.
Rude.
Chris, are you there?
I'm here. Why are you so rude?
That's not rude.
Well, it started as
What,
a
you think the
compliment.
whole world loves you?
It started
You
as a.
think there's not a single person in the world that don't love you?
No, they're all dead.
That I can believe. Right, so this is a last minute podcast because we've left it right to the last minute, and I was trucking through having a look at the podcast topics and the like, and we wrote one on there so long ago that's called A Witch's Book of Curves, Wandering Psychiatric Patients, and it was after a conversation that I had, and you might have been there, it was on the virtual moot, with Mr. Railroad. And for those that don't know, Mr. Railroad is the husband of Lady Poison. So Mr. Railroad and others, including myself, were talking about something, and it inspired me to write down A Witch's Book of Curbs / Wandering Psychiatric Patients as a podcast title with a little description. What happens when a Neo-Pagan reaches the end of a corridor, brackets I mean book. So I'm not entirely sure what that means, but from what I remember of the conversation, he was talking about psychiatric wards and facilities that are purposefully designed to confuse patients so they can't escape. So they're just like a circular corridor that just
that
go
never
round
ends.
and round.
That never ends.
Yeah, it never ends. So I was wondering whether you could say that about some of this knowledge and that's put out there. So it does say I mean book at the end of it, which leads me to think maybe what we were talking about was the knowledge that's out there and the people that you see go round and round and round in circles. Because I don't know if you'd agree with this or whether you've noticed this, but what I see, particularly within Neo-Paganism, is people adopt some certain practices and worshipping some gods and goddesses and the like, you know, whatever it is the Neo-Pagans do. And then they get so far with that, and then they seem to get bored and just switch to another pantheon or a different group. So they might start with something like Wicca, and then all of a sudden they're a bit bored with it. So then they think, oh, Norse is in, let's move over to the Norse. Oh, let's not do that. We'll have to go back to some... Oh, the Egyptian, that's all coming back. That's what everyone's doing. Let's go to the Egyptian thing. And what they tend to do is they tend to kind of go on this... I don't know, I wouldn't call it a Ferris wheel, but it is a case of they learn the beginnings of something, and then when they get to the end of the beginnings, and when I say beginnings, I don't mean our idea of...
You mean the end of the book.
Beginner, intermediate, and advanced. I mean the Crash Course Primer book. They finish that, and then they can't seem to go any further with it, so they just go round to the next thing. But they're only learning a beginner thing in something else that's almost the same, just dressed up a little different.
Yeah.
I don't know, what do you think about this? Have you noticed anything like this going on in the Neo-Pagan community?
Well, I was thinking it more is based on what the latest statues, the newest statues at Nemesis now are, and what they're photographed on Instagram. So what the latest pantheon is whichever one they're talking about most on social media. But maybe I'm being rude, which would be so unlike me and more like you.
Right. Okay.
What was that?
I don't know. You've just cut off, so I don't know what you said.
You didn't hear any of that? Then I don't know why. I don't know why you didn't hear any of that.
I heard something that's a bit more like, and then I didn't hear what you said.
Said a bit more like you. I made.
I presumed it would be something like that.
I made some rude comments.
Okay.
Okay. I'll give you my real answer. Everyone else heard the mean one. So yeah, I think it comes down to the fact of what's fashionable in books, doesn't it? So you'll have a bunch of people, Llewellyn or whatever, or a release what is popular at the time. So you'll get a load of a load of green witchery books, and then the next minute you'll get that won't be the flavour anymore. So they'll get a load of traditional witchcraft books come out, and then they'll go back, and then they'll the latest pantheon will come out. Something new about the Greek pantheon is popular again, and then the Egyptians and so on and so forth. It's not necessarily pantheon to pantheon, but it's more a case of the practice. So it might be what the latest fad is that the reenactment circles are doing. So they might jump through time from, okay, well, we're doing Anglo-Saxon at the moment, or we're going back to the medieval again for a little while, and so on and so forth. Like, as a new bit of information comes out, still, like you say, from a beginner's point of view, a new bit of information, but there'll have been a new dig on such and such that's got this new fancy copper pot, and then it'll be like, okay, we'll all jump on that one for a bit, or not magic and a bit of weaving or something.
Yeah.
That'll get them triggered back into the cycle. Obviously, I suppose we need to include a bit of a disclaimer.
So they see what's going on, what's popular.
Yeah. I think there needs to be a little bit of a disclaimer there on the fact that these mostly aren't witches. So, these are religious folk, although they wouldn't enjoy that phrase. But obviously, these are...
No, they're magpies, Chris. They're the fashionistas, the magpies. The Insta witches is what they are, because fashion's all about seasons and what's cool and what's not, isn't it? And that's what I think internet witchcraft is. What's cool, what's not. Everyone else is doing it, so I've got to do it.
What's
to
pretty?
Keep up with the Joneses. Or really, it's to keep up with the Ravenses.
Yeah, the Raven Grimsbys.
But you do see this with actual witches as well, I think. With actual beginner witches. I'm talking about the ones, they've been dedicated to a path for, say, 3 to 10 years. And then all of a sudden they swap from that path and move on to something completely different. There's a new beginner thing. And I think that it goes a little bit deeper, because what I think the case is, I mean, they do talk about this crooked path and all that, about weaving from one thing to the next. But I think what it is they reach a limit to what that path can teach them, how far they can get with that path, and then they look at something else and they think, I think that might hold the secrets. I don't really understand it. It looks mysterious, but maybe there's some answers there. And I'm thinking that there's a fine line there that needs to be drawn in the sand between people that do that in order to go and find answers, and the people that on that path that they were on for 3 to 10 years didn't get any answers from that and so move on. So is the people that the quest for looking for real magic, I think, because the people that find it, obviously, they say no man is an island and all that, and there's lots you can learn from other people's practices, and therefore lots you can learn from other cultures and things. But there's a big difference between the person that goes and does a course on one thing and then moves on to the course of another thing because they learnt nothing from the first one. And I am seeing a lot of that. That's why I think we get so many people that come, the mundanes and the beginner witches at the psychic fairs and the like, that come for consultations and they say, well, I can't do this spell casting, and I can't do this astral projection, and I can't do this breaking of curses and that, and I don't know what this is, and I've never worked with that. And you kind of think, okay, well, what have you been doing? And as it turns out, they haven't really been doing a lot. So the critical thinking and the want and the need to push and develop further, but more than anything, I think the inspiration to push their path further is not there. Because they've not really been walking along a magical path in general. What they've been doing is copy and paste.
And I think that's the problem,
ritual.
is rather than engaging with other witches and finding out what they've read and that kind of thing, and kind of figuring stuff out, what they've done is, that didn't work for me first time, so I'm going to move on to the next book that doesn't work first time. or whatever, or they, like you said, get to the end of a book and think they should know everything by the end of the book, and what they don't realise is they don't know anything because the books are so shit. Whereas actually, they're thinking that doesn't work. They're thinking that that particular practice
Yeah.
doesn't work for them. Whereas actually, what it is it's a shit book, that's been watered down and watered down to the point that they can't enjoy and learn anything, and then they think that they can't do that thing. Do you remember that ridiculous book? Because it happens in other self-help, in the self-help section too, with the kind of who are you a psychic kind of books that kind of, have got these silly tests in them, that, are supposed to convince them to actually do some of the
Yeah.
practicing, and trialing with the let's play with an orb, and let's do some or some automatic writing or something like that. But they don't actually understand the process because the book doesn't actually tell them how it works. It just says do this, then do that, then do that, and you'll have, if you're a psychic, you'll get this bit, and you're just kind of like, okay, well, that's not taught them any technique. It's not taught them what they're doing or told them how it works, and then they're wondering why they don't think this is the right path for them. And then they go on, move on to the next thing and the next thing, and then they discover on Instagram the term eclectic witch, and then they're kind of like, oh no, this is how lots of people do it. They just move from one thing to another. Or what's the other one? Chaos magicians. That's the other one that they like to use. They like to use the phrase chaos magician, and you're like, no, chaos doesn't mean you're chaotic. That's not how it works. The idea of chaos magic is about you taking an approach, running with it for as far as it possibly can go, and then going, okay, I've tried that. That's led me to think about this, then running off in that direction because it's branched off from the first one, not because you've just seen a new book in Waterstones and gone, oh, I'll try sigils this week. When I was doing, herbology last week, and you just kind of like, it just, yeah, it's these terms that they've turned into hashtags, so people think they understand what the word actually means, and then they just run with it. And like I said, like headless chickens running around in circles until someone makes them dinner. Like, I just, I don't get how it happens. But again, you wonder, I suppose you'll answer this one particular way, but what I'm going to ask is, do you think that is by design, like the mental hospital where they're expected to run around like chickens, and actually, unless you've got something about you, you can't read the next level, or the book's just shit, like I said?
There are a lot of shit books out there. But there is a
Okay.
book that is on the forefront.
Are you
It's in the
writing it?
future. It's coming soon, within the next
Okay.
couple of
Are you
years.
writing it?
That is going to change everything, Chris. It's going to change everything. I'm going to make an
Okay. That's fine.
announcement, but I'm going to make an announcement on the Patreon
Okay.
because I think our patrons deserve to know this. I mean, they talk about in Star Wars there's some sort of
Yeah.
convergence in the Force. Something's a
Disturbance.
brewing, something is happening, don't they, in the Star Wars universe and that. When Anakin Skywalker was born and that. And something happened, a ripple effect.
Okay.
Well, that happened today,
But
Chris,
not in...
and I want to tell you all about it.
Okay.
But I'm not going to tell the
Okay.
people that are listening. I'll tell the Patreons, but they got to keep it quiet. Okay?
Yeah.
So we'll move on because we're talking about, to a certain extent, insanity as well. And there's a couple of things I want to talk about in regards to insanity within occult circles and within, with magical practitioners. So the thing I'd open with, because we're talking about the circular corridors that we was discussing with Mr. Railroad.
Are we going for the traditional definition, which is In the definition of an insanity is to repeat something over and over again and expecting a new
Doing the same
change.
thing over and
Yes.
over again.
Okay. Go on.
Yeah. So these would be witches, you know, the ones that
Yeah.
celebrate the Sabbats, and they do the same thing that they
Yeah.
did the year before,
Yeah.
and the year before that, and the year before that, and the year before that. They do the same thing all the time, and you know, you could say something about structure in your life and that. We all celebrate Christmas every year and all that sort of. Well, I fucking don't, but some people do. A lot of people celebrate Christmas and that. But in terms of doing,
Yeah, but not the same
yeah,
way.
not necessarily in the same way, but there's the same people that all they ever do is the same rituals over and over and over and over and over again, never developing any new ones, never really changing anything. And when they do change things, they change the appearance. So instead of calling in a certain pantheon, they'll just swap it for a different one. But it's kind of almost pretty much the same, in it.
Yeah.
Especially to the Neo-Platonists, because they think they're just calling on the same thing as wearing a different mask. So, you know.
Yeah.
So, is that insanity? Are those people insane?
Well, I think there's room for you to possibly say such things. I
Well, if
think.
the
I think
definition
what's
is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
okay to play devil's advocate. Some of these people would say that that is a tradition, or that is um, that is their way of honouring that time. So they'll say marking or a celebration of those points in the year. Obviously, it's a pointless system on the basis that they don't even marry up to the actual seasons these days. But, because we still use,
Now, Chris, you're being elitist.
or especially when it comes to the okay, I'll go off on a little rant. The where they go off about the Celtic calendar, and then obviously, base it on a solar system when actually it would have been done by the lunar system. Those sorts of things that obviously start to trigger people because, or actually, we still use certain dates, like the 1st of Feb and all that kind of stuff, when actually you should base it on the position of a star, or in where when it gets to a certain point, or the first signs of spring, as opposed to a random date in February or March. It should be based on, okay, well, the first time you saw that thing happen, we then celebrate 3 days after. Like, and the 3 days after is because you need the 3 days to make that celebration happen. It might be baking the bread for it, or finding the vegetables in order to actually carve up, or the actual part of, there is a reason you have kind of the Ides of March or whatever, where you've got 3 days of something, is normally because it takes that long to prepare, to tell everybody, oh shit, have you noticed Mars has finally appeared in Leo, so therefore we must all go and those sorts of things. Are the bits that baffle me, is why even in a modern world where I know it's sometimes harder to see the if you're in a space in the world where the seasons don't change because you're in a big concrete city, then obviously surely at the very least those should be times where you go out and experience nature, whereas they often aren't. They're just kind of like, oh well, we've bought these fake leaves from Amazon, and we've gone and got this ivy from eBay, and they're not even real. Like there's not actual greenery. Anyway, sorry, I'm ranting again, and you're not interrupting me, which says you're enjoying the fact I'm going on a rant.
It amuses me, but I think I can top that, right? I was
Okay, go on.
invited to a Neo-Pagan ritual, emphasis on the Neo-Pagan ritual, not
Okay.
pagan ritual. Because we all know Neo-Pagan's an insult as far as the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast is concerned. If we call you a Neo-Pagan, it's probably worse than calling you a... Oh,
Did not
Chris, your
just do
face
that.
then. What?
You know I
What?
love that word, but not on here. Okay, carry
Why?
on. Carry on, tell your story.
Okay, so I was invited accidentally to this neo-pagan, I'll just call it a thing, right? It was like a harvest festival, neo-pagan harvest festival, where they're offering the first of the harvest to a specific goddess, because there's always a goddess in it.
Yeah.
Was it a goddess of the harvest? It wasn't necessarily a goddess of the harvest, no. It just happened to be the favourite goddess at the time, Chris. What I got a little confused of, that it was a harvest festival. It was in the middle of a city, the city of Bath,
Yeah.
yes. And what was all of the offerings at the harvest festival were strawberries and raspberries in cellophane packets that had just been picked up on the way from Tesco's. Is there something about that strikes you as a little odd?
One, I don't know how that is a harvest if you did not harvest anything. Um, it would have been better if they'd have all just come in and they'd all brought scoops of grass that they'd actually picked at the side of the road. Like that would have made more sense. Um, but obviously that doesn't that doesn't fit. Whereas no, they would rather. I bet they weren't even British strawberries and raspberries.
I don't know. I didn't see the top of the packet because they ripped it off. But they were still. They had the table and they didn't even put them into bowls or anything. They literally just put them there on the table. And then
In
you
the
had to give
plastic.
a portion to the goddess. And then you were allowed to have some after the goddess,
Okay.
basically.
Okay.
And I just felt, I wasn't laughing. I wasn't lowing. I wasn't laughing out loud. I don't know if anyone else gets this, but a horrified laugh that just nothing, no words escape, no sound escapes. It's just like you freeze in a kind of smiley position, but you're so gobsmacked, but you're gobsmacked in the form of a smile. Does that ever happen to you? Have you ever had that happen?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of
It's
like I have an urge to laugh, but I can't bring myself to do it because I'm just in shock.
yeah. Where you just have this kind of Joker like grin on your face of kind of like uncomfortable, but at the same time in disbelief and just wanting to piss yourself. Um.
I was in disbelief. I do think that perhaps some of the older members of the, I wouldn't really say congregation in the form of Christian, but let's be fair, it's congregation because they meet often, really, and there's one high priestess, or high priestess normally in control of the whole thing. But the congregation, I think one of them did piss themselves. But to be fair, they were quite old. I
So I
don't think it
just
was for the same reasons that I was shocked.
yeah,
But they all
and I
seemed to be having a wonderful time. There wasn't a lot of energy going on there, but
yeah,
they had a nice time, and you can tell they do this over and over again. You know, when they
yeah.
go down to their circles in a certain place. I'm not going to say where it is. And then they take the stuff they get from Aldi on the way.
But
Is
the thing,
that harvest magic work there,
no,
or is that what we call a picnic?
that's I'm not even sure that's a picnic. I don't think there's enough things there to be a picnic. Um, that is a half-assed snack in a pub where you could have just gone and harvested scratchings from the bar. You may as well have done the same, and just gone and got scratchings and peanuts, um, and gone. Here's my harvest festival. Did that particular goddess even like berries?
I have no idea. I'm too ashamed to say which goddess it is because I know there's
Okay,
someone that cares a lot about that goddess, and I think they'll probably have a week's worth of upset listening to this and getting very irate. So I'm not going to say who it was. It doesn't
okay,
really matter.
okay.
But okay, so let's expand a little bit on this, and then we'll talk about other forms of insanity.
Okay.
Because I'm thinking, okay, that's a harvest festival in the form of, okay, what we want to do is we want to appreciate a specific deity. We want to keep them on our side, so we're kind of paying them off with offerings. We'll do it once a year, at a big time when the harvest comes, because that's when we've got the most abundance. And offering it first is a sign of respect. So that's kind of, I think, the core concept of what they were trying to do.
Yeah, but it's also supposed to be a sacrifice by
Yes,
giving the
exactly.
first part of
Yes,
something that is bountiful.
yes. So in the modern age for them, I wonder whether giving them the first, like, we could talk about things that might actually work out a little better. So I'm thinking maybe if you're a smoker,
Yeah,
refusing to have a cigarette or a packet of cigarettes and giving that packet of cigarettes as an offering, that's, I think, a fairly good offering because there's a certain amount of pain there and it's
yes,
also potentially helpful in terms of your health, is probably good for you. Because deities tend not to get lung cancer, I've noticed, but humans
yes,
often do.
yeah,
The harvest, in concerned how most people are concerned, particularly the self-employed, is that nice little window around the tax return time when you know how much money you've made and you've got to quickly spend a lot of money in order so the taxman doesn't steal it. For me, that would make sense as a modern day harvest because you're working all year for a paycheck. And
yeah,
that's essentially your thing that you're kind of reaping, and you're given a proportion of that. Kind of like how Christians in churches give a tithe. You could give money to a deity. If you do that, I'd suggest writing a check, because a lot of the time the deities don't cash the checks. Whereas if you just do it with the paper money and the coins, they often take that. So there's a little trick for you. But essentially, yeah, it's sacrifice, isn't it? But as a community, you're talking about things like that evolving, harvest festivals, things like that evolving from a community coming together in celebration, adding a deity onto that, and then also it's farming and agriculture. So you're talking about the community as a whole. If it's certainly in the countryside, not everyone might be a farmer, but some people might bake breads and stuff like that and bring that.
yeah.
It is something that you're actually, your resources you are using in order to do that. Now, I know that you are using your resources to buy the £1 whatever raspberries in the plastic. I do wonder what they did with the plastic afterwards because I noticed that there was a big black bag. So I don't know if they put they made an offering to the landfill spirits. But they get a lot of offerings, so you don't need to give the landfill spirit of the landfill, you don't need to give them anything else. Um,
It would
but
be
there we
better
go,
to
we've
give them a
literally got
day
one more
off.
minute left. I don't know where this half an hour's gone, we've got one more minute left.
Me ranting
Um,
mostly, I think.
Possibly. So what I'll do is I'll introduce the next topic, and then we'll have to say goodbye to the regular listeners. So the next thing I want to talk about, because we were talking about insanity and doing the same thing over and over again. Well, there's other types of insanity that I think I see in occultism, particularly with regards to certain people that tend to like to call themselves left-hand path practitioners of the left-hand path. And that is the insanity of, they clearly are being fed upon and going insane very slowly.
Yeah,
And I think both you and me are pretty crazy, but we're crazy because of the things that we do
yeah,
in terms of the experiments and because of the conversations we have. If you overhear us in a bar or in a restaurant or in a cafe, as often people do, the heads turn and they think, did those two people really have a conversation about digging people up in the graveyard and using them for some sort of necromantic rite? I don't know what necromancy is, but I don't like the sound of it. Isn't it that thing where you have sex with dead people? No, that's necrophilia. Right, well, those two I think are either into necromancy or necrophilia or necro something. That's kind of what we would be considered insane for. But then there's the insanity of the people that seem to be enslaved to things that end up feeding off of them. And I really want to talk about that next because I think that's really important. But we'll have to say goodbye to our regular listeners and continue to talk about this on the Patreon now.